Let's jump right into the next topic. Stefan Schubert, very prominent VC here in the Rhineland region, has 2 years ago coined the term camels over unicorns. And with that, it was quite an interesting idea. He meant, how do we go about building really sustainable companies? Profitability over hyperscaling, sustainability over high risk, capital efficiency versus headless spending. And we're taking on this topic now with our next speaker, who has also made a very deliberate decision to build a company that is not based on hypergrowth, but that it's going at its own pace. We want to hear lessons learned and are excited to hear this from Jan Dzulko himself. The session is led by Julian Riedelbauer of Drakestar. Please bring them on with a big applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. You'll also ask questions later throughout the session, so feel free to prepare your questions. Jan, you are building a great company, very sizable, not yet exited like the previous speaker, Lina X, with very renowned clients like Henkel, Obi. Everyone in the room would love to have those clients, I assume.
And their sponsor, as you know.
Their sponsor.
Startupland.
Exactly. So, you did start your company in 2016, long before device as a service became a widely discussed category. What problems did you want to solve initially?
Yeah, initially it started like I think many of the entrepreneurial journeys start. I dropped my phone in 2015 and suddenly realized everything is as a service. There's always somebody who helps me with a problem, and my solution was I buy a new phone on Amazon and sell my old phone on eBay. And I thought that's so annoying, and why do I have to do that, that I thought I have to change it. So that was the original idea, was really from this own problem, like a very small, tiny thing that annoyed me. And I thought, if I have this problem and everyone is using smartphones, it must be a big market. So I decided, let's try it and let's found a company. And that's how Everphone came to be founded.
As far as I know, you moved from consumer to B2B. Can you describe the journey a bit in the beginning?
Yeah. So we started B2C. We rented out phones to consumers. Worked really well. We had super happy customers. However, it was incredibly complicated to explain the value proposition to consumers, because they were still used to buying, to owning, to having this device in your hands. And it took us about a year to realize consumers saw it as a way to get a phone cheaper than paying the full price. So it was also a little bit negative self-selection on customers. And then when we were about to think like, okay, does this really work out? I got a call from a B2B sales organization. And they said, we have 200 people out there in the field. If they're one day without a working phone, it really costs us about 200 euros per day. Your service is perfect. And then we realized, wow, with one call, we gained 200 customers. And on the same time, we understood it's much more valuable. The value proposition we can give to companies is much bigger. So we completely pivoted within, I think, 4 weeks. We canceled all B2C subscriptions and we bet everything on the B2B market, and was probably the best decision we ever made.
So, after doing the decision, you decided to raise a lot of venture capital and go into hypergrowth. What did you make the shift, and how did you raise so much money? Probably also a good story for every entrepreneur or future entrepreneur in the room. Why did you change to hypergrowth?
Simply said, the model worked. The value proposition was extremely attractive to our customers, because before there was only leasing and the IT department still had to take care of everything. And literally the demand so far outstripped our supply. And the second problem is, though, we owned the assets. So we have the assets. I have to buy a phone to rent it out, of course. But that created the problem. I needed debt, and we'll come to this later. But in the beginning, obviously, as a startup, you can't raise debt. It's impossible. No bank will ever give you any credit line. So we had to raise a lot of equity. So I think in the first year, right off the bat, we had to raise 10 million, I think in the first year, and the second year was already another 15 million. So we were in the raise money, and when you raise from VCs, of course, they expect hypergrowth. So I think in the first years, we had 800, 1,000% growth year over year, and really came into this rat race, which felt very good in the beginning. It's like a drug.
So being on steroids, you scaled the company. What worked well, and where should you maybe, looking back, should have paid more attention about it too?
I would say it is incredibly easy to go fast because money doesn't matter. It's when you always know that you can, when you rent an office, it doesn't matter if it's 20 or 30 or 40 euros the square meter, because you're spending so much money. You're raising 10, 20, 30 million each year that you basically lose a little bit the touch of what are things worth and really focusing on the cost side of the business, because you're only focusing on growth and the numbers, and there's always this tree where money will fall down from called VCs until there's not. So I think that's the big trap you can fall into, is you don't become aware of your cost side of the business until it's too late.
Interesting and important learning. And then at some point you made the rather significant decision to switch from hypergrowth into a more self-sustaining mode. Why did you change? How did you develop, and what steps did you have to take?
Yeah, so a decision, I would call it a forced decision. I didn't do that because I wanted to. I did that because I had to. Very simply, the day that Russia attacked Ukraine, a catastrophe overall, of course, but for us specifically in our business model, interest rates went up, the capital markets dried up completely. No investor wanted to invest because they weren't sure if the mobile phone configuration of the future should be done in Russian or in German. So we had no way to raise more capital, and at the same time, interest rates rising. We had 100 million debt at that time, created massive pressure on our cost side. And exactly what I said in the very beginning, we weren't super cost-focused before. Suddenly, we had to plan for a year before. We had planned to be, I think, about minus 15 million negative EBIT. And we didn't have the money to do that. So we had to switch from going minus 15 million negative EBIT to a positive EBIT within 1 year. And obviously, you can only do that by extremely hard measures. So yeah, it was a forced decision, but in the end, looking back, I would say it was absolutely worth it, and we learned a lot.
So this rapid transformation, also maybe giving advice to the entrepreneurs in the room, what were the major decisions and toughest things you had to do? Or maybe you can give an example where you said, okay, this was really tough and cost me some sleepless nights.
Yeah, I think the most horrible thing as a founder is always taking out people. So we knew to extend our runway and to make it to the promised profitable land, we had to take out about 25% of our employees. And that is, to me, the hardest decision, because these are not people who did a bad job. You know, I have no problem taking somebody out who's not performing on his or her job. But to really have to take out people who did a fantastic job in the past, and then go to them and tell them, like, your journey is over here. That was incredibly hard. Maybe if anyone ever gets into the situation of having to do something at that scale, you know, a couple of people is okay, but 25% was incredibly hard. What we did is mentally, with my C-level, we said we can save 3/4 of the people. Because we thought, like, if this company ends, everyone will lose their job. So we really sat down and we said, like, okay, whom are the people we can save in the company that make sure that we have what we called back then a skeleton crew who can still sail the ship. And that's how we approached it. But I would say that was still the most painful thing we had to do, is in this one meeting. And we also tried and mostly did it in one cut. So on one day. And back then, I think we had 150 people, so I think we had to fire 40 people on one day. To this day, this was hands down the worst day of my life.
I can believe it. And at the same time, it made you harden the company. You're a very experienced founder now. So whatever comes, you're ready for it. And I'm sure that if you look at the bigger companies, with the AI implementation going forward in the next 5 years, there will be lots of companies that need to cut workforces in some specific segments because they need to become more efficient based on AI to be competitive going forward. So I think this is something everybody has to learn. And big managers of big corporates also have to do it.
Yes.
It's unusual in the startup world, of course.
You're absolutely right. So I think, first of all, it is something frequently one can ask the question, are the right people in the right position? And I think especially in AI, I don't think that AI will replace people. AI will replace people not using AI, because people who are right now doing things which are difficult, in the future these things will be simple using AI, and then we have to see that we find people who can do things which are impossible that then become difficult. So I think it's more changing roles than really firing people. But of course, the people you can't upskill are the ones at some point you have to let go. And that, again, is something in the very beginning. We came to the times when we had too much money. And I really think that's one of the biggest problems of young startups is if they raise too big rounds. So it's always raise an appropriate amount. It's always so tempting to take the money when it's on the table. And that's the weird thing. Once you're on a roll and you have great numbers, you get inbound calls from people who say, like, don't you want another 5 million? Here they are, just take them. And you think like, yes, awesome, it sounds great. But there's a huge trap in there. So I think in terms of, you keep then people who don't perform in their roles, but obviously you also keep a cost base. For instance, just a simple thing. With just a couple of settings and spending 1 day, I think we halved our cloud costs. We had so many cloud instances for test servers and stuff like that. Nobody ever looked at it. And I think frequently, once in a year, really like a Frühlingsputz you do in Germany, you should just look at your cost base and go line item by line item through the positions. And even if everything is going great, still do it. Because there's so much you can optimize and really just costs 1 day. So it's hygiene in the end.
So beyond optimizing the cloud and right-sizing the workforce, what did you do to save 15 million, to improve your EBIT by 15 million? Was there some more magic?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it magic, but I think the concept of the skeleton crew hits it very, very well. The question is, whom do you really need to still continue to survive, basically? What do you need for survival? You know, when you prepare for, I don't know, a situation without power, you have like this bag and you only put the most basic thing. You need water, you need some food, you maybe need a knife. And to really think in your company, what are the things that I really, really need? So unfortunately, the first thing you don't need is salespeople. So you take out you can't take out all of them because you still want to grow at some point again. But these things are, then you look in the IT department. Who are the people really working on running the system and who are the people working on new features? So first of all, we basically distributed the company into growth people and into basic core service people. And unfortunately there, we had to cut down on every expense, and you'd be surprised how many expenses you find, which are really unnecessary. Just what our first Christmas parties cost compared to the Christmas parties later. Big budget item.
I can imagine. How did your investors react to the shift?
Obviously, the existing investors saw the crisis coming and they were quite supportive. I mean, any investor, I think, loves, we heard this in the introduction, now profitability is a thing that's really cool. Back in the day when I founded 2016, nobody cared about profitability. Everybody said growth is everything that matters. All you want is double your numbers every year and you will always raise money. And this new paradigm of you should become profitable, our investors obviously loved. So they were fully on board, and I have to say also very supportive by saying, if you show us a plan and if you show us your unit economics are working, we will help you to a certain extent with bridge financing in this time. So I think it's a coordination process together with the investors to make sure in the survival mode you will survive. But then you have to show them, of course, that afterwards how can you return to a growth level if you come out of this trough, basically.
You're working with equity and debt investors. Do you see big differences, and would you recommend founders to also try to raise debt in combination or in addition to equity?
Depends on the business model. Depends on what kind of debt you're raising and from whom you're raising debt. And it's a completely different game. So in my experience, startup CFOs rarely know anything about debt because it's not in their normal portfolio. And there are a lot of dangers because debt always sounds like you get money, but the truth is there are covenants. If you breach these covenants, they will send you a little letter and say like you have to pay back your 20 million tomorrow, and you have big problems. So debt is great because it doesn't dilute you as a founder or as the founding team and investors that are there. However, it's incredibly dangerous because obviously also the risk profile of debt providers is very different than a VC. They don't care about your business. They don't care if you're doing well or not. They only care, are you going to pay back your debt? So they will much earlier put you into a survival mode than any growth investor would do. So I think, yes, debt is great because debt helps you grow the business. You can invest money at a very low interest, relatively speaking, interest rate compared to VC money. However, you have to be absolutely aware that as soon as you fall under these covenants, you really are betting the company. So debt, yes, but know what you're getting into.
Good reality check for the audience here.
Yeah, especially venture debt, maybe. If we take that as a special part where a part of the security is your company's equity, basically. I think they are the first ones, once winds turn and you suddenly get into any problems, the venture debt people are the first ones which will pull out the rug and then you drop as a company.
In a few minutes, we'll start with the questions of the audience so you can prepare. Back to your company. At some point, you expanded the product line beyond phones, smartphones, to also tablet and notebooks and computers. Why did you do so, and what's your experience with handling a lot of more SKUs?
Took us very long, to be quite honest. Everphone is now 10 years old. We just started last year to manage laptops. It should be the same thing. A laptop's nothing but a tablet with a keyboard. Truth is, though, the management in large companies is very different of laptops than it is of smartphones. And that's simply because of Windows. So Windows, Mac OS, no problem. Windows, very complicated setup. They are custom made. So a laptop for BMW, one of our large customers, it's custom made, it's custom ordered, it's its own chipset, own load set, so whole new game. And therefore also maybe a second advice I would give myself, stay as long as possible on one product that works. And only if you really nailed that one product, think about moving to a different product category. So I think waiting 9 years to actually move to this very simple annex category was the right thing, and we also see it now. It's working now, but it took us a while to really wrap our heads around the entire laptop game.
Thank you. So, what would be your top advice to founders here in the room, looking back at your history and also growing like fast growth and then profitable growth? Do you have some recommendations? How should you build a company?
First of all, as mentioned, regardless in which phase you are, every year we have a year which we have a yearly meeting with our CFO. We go line item by line item through the cost base. That's the first thing. The second thing is don't lie to yourself about the unit economics. So if you're growing, anyone can sell a dollar for 80 cents. So if you're growing just because you spend a lot on marketing or you're giving away your product for free or half the price and you're telling yourself like later when we increase the price then it will work, very dangerous trap. Because then at some point when you really want to become profitable, it just doesn't work because your basic unit economics don't work. So I think instead of always aiming for super high growth, aim for at least a certain cohort has to be profitable in itself. And be honest to yourself about the core profitability, because I often see also in pitch decks I get for angel investments, the unit economics are only the gross margin. It's not the unit economics, because you don't have sales cost in there. You don't have overhead cost in there. You don't have the rent for your freaking office in there. But you have to pay these things. So to always say any model works at super scale. You know, if you say like, if Everphone said at 1 million devices we would work, that just doesn't help. Because if before at some point you have to turn the business into profitability, you need unit economics that really support it. And the only proof in the pudding is if somebody buys your at full price that you really can monetize on the unit economics, that proves the business model. And I think that's the main time I spend on pitch decks is looking at the unit economics.
Thank you, and I think it's a very real advice, because you also always see it in our processes. We have to show core profitability and unit economics. Otherwise, in today's world, it was different in 2021. But in today's world, it's all about path to profitability. Unless you're an AI native company, some of them are burning lots of cash because they're growing so fast, but they're also spending a lot on tokens. And it will be interesting what the end game looks like there.
Yes, exactly. I think for moonshots, maybe also the other thing I said, it doesn't really matter to moonshots. You don't have to look at your cost base, because there's a 1 in 10 chance you make it. And if you make it, you really define a new category, a Google, a Meta, or who else, really. Then it doesn't matter if you have a fantastic idea like that. I think all these advices I did are more for like normal businesses who want to change a little bit of category, but not fundamentally. But yes, I agree. There are some business models where it's really just about learning and growth, and often they don't even have unit economics, because the technology, taking AI right now, nobody of us can say what will be the true cost of AI in 3 years. There's too many variables in there. The technology is unclear where it's going to move. So I think there it's much more finding use cases. But that's sort of a different kind of business model.
So with that, we open the floor to questions from the audience. Do we have questions? No questions?
Good.
One more from my side.
Sure.
What's your vision? Do you want to go public? Do you want to sell the company at some point? Do you want to just keep on running it for 20 years and doing some secondaries for the early stage or venture investors that have a LP/GP fund structure and need to pay back capital at some point?
Yes, I mean, obviously it's less about what I want, but what the investors want, I would say. I have to say, after this entire journey, it's so much fun to run a profitable company. So I'm really enjoying it. Before this game of always raising new money, it's interesting to a certain degree, but it's always this, every 2 years you have this existential threat of not making a financing round and really being faced with the probability that your company might not exist in 6 months. It's really something, it's a little bit of a kick, but it's at some point really mentally draining. So right now, to have a company that's actually profitable, I love. So I definitely wouldn't want to sell it myself. But you're totally right, we're 10 years old now, so there are a couple of investors who surely at some point would like to have a return, so there will probably be a secondary. Maybe if the IPO window ever opens again, that would be an interesting journey to do that. So I think we could consider that, but right now, I think we're not really thinking about any exit things. We're happy to be profitable.
Thank you very much, and good luck scaling your company to the next level. You're building something big.
Thank you very much, and yeah.
Jan Dzulko
Thank you.
and Julian Riedebauer, thank you so much. Fantastic.